It is well known that in the earliest period of its history, Rome was ruled by kings. Tradition names 7 kings, from the legendary Romulus to Tarquinius the Proud, the last monarch expelled from the city by an assembly of citizen warriors, after which power was transferred to 2 consuls elected for 1 year. And the People's Assembly passed a strict law stating that anyone who wished to become king of Rome must be killed without trial. Moreover, any attempt to occupy any public office without a clearly expressed will of the people was also punishable by death. The bearer of state sovereignty henceforth became exclusively the Roman people. Monarchy was replaced by the Republic, which will be destined to pass a long and glorious path of half a millennium, when the sole power will be restored in the form of the Principate. Rome had never been in such a dense ring of enemies as after its transformation from a monarchy into a weak city-state, controlling barely 900 square kilometers of territory. Many of the neighboring Italian communities, formerly subjugated by Roman kings, regained their freedom and formed the Latin Union to resist Rome's claims. Italy was a highly diverse conglomeration of independent tribes or cities, each ruled by its own rulers and speaking similar but different languages. Struggles with neighbors. Rome was located exactly in the middle of this numerous community, and from a military point of view could conduct an offensive in any direction. At the same time, there was a flip side of the coin. The united enemy could attack the city simultaneously from the north, east and south, as well as from the sea. His salvation was that the enemies rarely united their actions against Rome. When the Eternal City was at war with the Sabines, the powerful Sabine family of Claudius came over to its side and obtained the rights of Roman citizenship on favorable terms. The Sabines were defeated and all their lands were annexed by Rome, and eventually received full Roman suffrage. The exiled Tarquini persuaded some of the Latin cities to unite in war against Rome. Faced with this decidedly too powerful alliance, the Romans appointed their first dictator, Aulus Postumius. At the Battle of Lake Regillus they won a salutary victory, receiving help, as legends assure us, from the gods Castor and Pollux, who had left Olympus to fight in the Roman line. 3 more years later Rome concluded a treaty with the Latin Union, under which the parties solemnly promised that, between the Romans and the Latin cities will be peace as long as the earth and the sky stand. Both parties will receive an equal share in all the lucre captured during the joint wars. Thus Rome became a member of the Union, then its chief, finally its master. He then went into battle against the Volscians. It was in this war that Gaius Marcius was honored with the nickname Coriolanus, after capturing the city of Coriola, the capital of the Volscians. Historians add that Coriolanus became an irreconcilable reactionary, was sent into exile at the insistence of the plebs' popular assemblies, then fled to the Volscians, rebuilt their army and led it to besiege Rome. The starving Romans, the legend continues, sent embassy after embassy to persuade him, but all to no avail. Finally, Coriolanus came to Coriolanus' wife and mother and began to persuade him to change his intentions, threatening that otherwise they will stand in the way of the advance of the army Volskov. After that he retreated with his army and was killed by the Volscians or, according to another version, lived among them until a very old age. The next stage, Veii and Rome were engaged in a deadly duel for the control of the Tiber. Rome besieged the hostile city for 9 years, and without success. Encouraged by this, the Etruscan cities joined together in another anti-Roman coalition. Under attack from all sides, when its very existence was in doubt, Rome appointed a dictator, Camillus, who raised a new army, captured Veii and divided its lands among Roman citizens. After many more wars, southern Etruria was annexed by Rome and given the almost modern name of Tuscia and later Tuscany. Meanwhile, a new and even greater threat arose. That long duel between Rome and Gaul had begun, a duel that would end only with Caesar many centuries later. While Rome and Etruria fought each other in 14 successive wars, Celtic tribes trickled across the Alps from Gaul and Germany and settled in Italy north of the Po River. Latin historians called the invaders Celts, Galatians or Gauls. Little is known about their origins. We can only see them as representatives of the same branch of Indo-Europeans that lived in Germany, Gaul, central Spain, Belgium, Wales, Scotland and Ireland and took part in the formation of the Pro-Romanic languages there. Polybius paints them as tall and statuesque, adoring warfare, fighting naked except for gold amulets and chains. When the Celts, the inhabitants of southern Gaul, tasted Italian wine, it supposedly pleased them so much that they decided to travel to the country where such delicious fruits were grown. Most likely, they were driven even more by the lack of arable land and new pastures. Coming to Italy, the Celts lived there for a while in a world unnatural to them, cultivating the land and grazing cattle, while gradually adopting the Etruscan culture they caught in neighboring cities. Eventually, the Gauls invaded Etruria and set about plundering it. The Etruscans resisted sluggishly, as most of their army went to the aid of the Roman besieged Veii. The Gauls went to Clusium. A year later they met the Romans at the Allia River, put them to flight and entered Rome without encountering any resistance. They sacked and burned large sections of the city and besieged the remnants of the Roman army on the crest of the Capitoline Hill for 7 months. Eventually, the Romans relented and paid the Gauls nearly 1.5 tons of gold to abandon the city. The Gauls did leave, but they returned periodically. Having been repulsed time after time, they finally settled for control of northern Italy, which has since been called Cisalpine Gaul. The Romans who survived the Gallic invasion found their city so devastated that many were tempted to abandon the ruins and make Veii the new capital. Camillus, who was honored and triumphantly named the second founder of Rome, for expelling the Gauls, dissuaded the People's Assembly, and the government of the Republic took financial aid to those who decided to rebuild their homes. This rapid development was largely responsible for the chaotic urban layout and the risky curvature of the narrow streets, which can still be seen today. The subjugated peoples, seeing that Rome was on the brink of ruin, revolted again and again, and it took half a century of periodic wars to cure them of their desire for freedom. The Latins, the Equians, the Gernics, the Volsci attacked one by one or all together. Had the Volscians been victorious, they would have cut Rome off from southern Italy and the sea, quite possibly ending Roman history and depriving us of our ancient heritage. But the cities of the Latin Union were defeated. Rome dissolved the Union and annexed almost all of Latium. This war was marked by 2, apparently legendary, acts. One of the consuls, Publius Decius, plunged at full gallop into the thick of the enemy, dying to win Rome the support of the gods. His colleague in the consular magistracy, Titus Manlius Torquatus, beheaded his own son after he had won a skirmish with the enemy by disobeying orders. Even if these are beautiful fictions, they show the strength of Roman character anyway. Meanwhile, having defeated the Volscians, Rome found itself face to face with the strong tribes of the Samnites. They ruled over a large part of central Italy, where there were rich cities. They had subjugated most of the Etruscan and Greek settlements on the west coast and were Hellenized enough to create distinctive Campanian art. The Samnites were probably far more civilized than the Romans. Rome fought them in 3 bloody wars for control of Italy. At Cavdus the Romans suffered one of their most crushing defeats, and their defeated army passed, under the yoke, an arch of enemy spears, as a sign of submission. The consuls who had been with the army made a shameful peace, which was rejected by the Senate. The Samnites allied themselves with the Etruscans and Gauls, and for a time Rome alone confronted the tribes of all Italy. The intrepid legions won a decisive victory at Centina, and Rome annexed Campania and Umbria to its power. After another 12 years, the Republic, which held firm, drove the Gauls back across the Po River and once again relegated Etruria to the position of a dependent territory. Henceforth, In the lands between the Gallic north and the Greek south, Rome was the lord of Italy. To finalize matters, the Senate offered the Greek polities a choice between an alliance with Roman supremacy and serious conflict. Preferring an alliance with Rome to further absorption by the barbarian tribes, whose numbers both outside and within the Greek cities were steadily increasing, Turin, Locra and Crotona accepted the Roman terms. Pyrrhic victories. Perhaps here, as in the cities of Latium, serious difficulties arose in connection with class warfare, and Roman garrisons were stationed to protect the large landowners from the gaining strength of the plebs. The preconditions for the coming agrarian revolution were already being created. The city of Tarentum became stubborn and called on the Epirus king Pyrrhus for help. This well-bred Greek and good warrior, enraptured by the tales of Achilles and Alexander, crossed the Adriatic Sea with the Epirus troops, defeated the Romans at Heraclea and gave European languages a new adjective, lamenting the cost of his Pyrrhic victory. Now all the Greek cities of Italy joined the king, and the Lucanians, Brati and Samnites declared themselves his allies. Pyrrhus sends to Rome his commander Cinea with a peace proposal and released under the word of honor 2,000 prisoners obliged to return if Rome prefers war. The Senate was about to agree to his terms when the old and blind Appius Claudius, who had long before withdrawn from all public affairs, was brought into the Senate building and declared that Rome would not make peace while there was an enemy army on Italian soil. The Senate sent back the prisoners released by Pyrrhus, and entered the war. The young king won another victory, and then, dissatisfied with the slowness and cowardice of his Italian allies, Pyrrhus crosses with his thinning army to Sicily. He lifts the Carthaginian siege of Syracuse and drives the Carthaginians from all their possessions on the island. Nevertheless, Pyrrhus' arrogant behavior began to irritate the Sicilian Greeks, who believed they could maintain their freedom without order or courage. They withdrew their support from King Pyrrhus, and he returned to Italy. His army met the Roman army at the Battle of Benevento, where Pyrrhus suffered his first defeat. The lightly armed and mobile maniples proved their superiority over the sluggish Greek phalanxes and opened a new chapter in military history. Pyrrhus demanded reinforcements from his Italian allies, who refused, doubting his reliability and constancy. He returned to Epirus and died an adventurer's death in Greece. During a street fight with the Spartans, a woman threw a piece of tile at him from the roof of the house, which got into the joint between the plates of his armor. The king collapsed to the ground and was killed. In the same year, the city of Tarentum capitulated, and soon all Greek cities ceased resistance, then also surrendered and Samnites. So after 200 years of incessant warfare, Rome became the leading political and military force in Italy, uniting the previously disparate lands. The conquests were quickly consolidated by the creation of colonies, some created by the Latin Union, some by Rome. These colonies served several purposes. They found employment for the surplus population and, as a consequence, reduced class strife in Rome itself. The colonies acted as military garrisons and were centers of loyalty among subjugated peoples, outposts, and markets for Roman trade. Besides, colonies allowed to solve the food question, producing agrarian products supplied to the capital. Conquests in Italy were brought to an end by the plough soon after they were begun by the sword. It was in this way that many Italian cities that still exist today were founded or Romanized. Latin language and culture spread throughout the peninsula, massively still barbaric and multilingual. Italy was gradually moving toward unity. The first step toward political synthesis, brutal in execution, majestic in result in the form of empire, had been taken. But in Corsica, Sardinia, Sicily, Africa, closing the western Mediterranean to Roman trade and enclosing Italy within the walls of the seas that washed over it, a power older and richer than Rome, Carthage, whose wars with Rome we have already described,